The cafe was already crowded when he walked in, sunlight filtering through tall glass windows, catching the dust in a golden haze that made everything seem softer than it really was. But for Ethan Rowe, nothing in his life had been soft for years. His shoulders bore the quiet weight of a man who had fought too long, lost too much, and still carried himself like he couldn't afford to crumble. His eyes, dark and steady, scanned the room until they landed on the only empty seat left, or so he thought. He moved toward it, a steaming coffee in hand, his worn leather jacket brushing against strangers as he passed. But just as he set his cup down, a sharp voice sliced through the hum of conversations. "That's my seat." Ethan turned. The woman standing before him was striking, tall, elegant, the kind of beauty that drew eyes the moment she entered a room. She wore a white blouse tucked into a silk skirt, her face barely touched by makeup, yet somehow flawless. He recognized her instantly. Everyone would. Aria Lane, the actress whose films had once lit up every screen, whose heartbreaks and triumphs had become national gossip. But now she looked exhausted, guarded, and maybe a little lost. Before Ethan could respond, a small hand tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy," said a soft voice. Little Ava, his 8-year-old daughter, blinked up at him, her pigtails slightly uneven from his clumsy morning attempt at braiding. "Can we sit, please? My feet hurt." Aria's gaze fell on the girl, and for a fleeting second, her expression softened, before tightening again. "I'm sorry," she said coolly, though her tone wavered slightly, "but I've been waiting for that seat." Ethan exhaled slowly. His life had taught him that sometimes, even when you deserved the smallest kindness, the world wouldn't hand it to you. But then again, he'd also learned that standing your ground didn't mean starting a fight. He gave a quiet smile, scooped up his daughter, and said simply, "Not anymore." Then, to Aria's utter surprise, he pulled out the chair, sat down, and placed Ava on his lap. "If you really want it," he added, "you're welcome to share it. Before you hear what happened next, if you believe in kindness, second chances, and stories that remind us of the goodness still left in people, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel, Kindness Journal. Your support helps us keep spreading stories that touch hearts every day." The awkward silence that followed could have filled the entire cafe. Aria didn't know what to say. It had been years since anyone had spoken to her without pretense, fear, or admiration. She'd been living in a glass house of fame and loneliness, her life a string of premieres and breakups, headlines and hollow smiles. And here was this man, this ordinary man, who didn't seem to care who she was. Ava broke the silence. "You look like the princess from Daddy's favorite movie." Aria blinked. "Your daddy watches my movies." Ethan gave a small, embarrassed chuckle. "Used to, before the cable got cut." Aria bit back a smile. For the first time in months, someone had made her laugh, genuinely. She glanced around and saw no other seats open, so she hesitated before pulling out the chair across from them. "Fine," she said softly. "But only because I don't want you to spill your coffee on me." They sat in silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Ava played with her straw, humming a tune, while Aria studied Ethan from behind her sunglasses. His hands were rough, his knuckles scarred. Not the kind of man who spent his days in comfort. There was a quiet strength about him, the kind you only earned after life had stripped everything else away. Finally, curiosity broke through. "You look like you've seen better days," Aria said lightly. Ethan's lips curved. "You could say that. I'm a mechanic, or was. Lost my job 2 months ago. Been trying to pick up part-time gigs while keeping Ava in school." He glanced at his daughter. "She deserves more than I can give her right now." Something shifted in Aria's chest. She had everything: fame, wealth, recognition. Yet she couldn't remember the last time she'd been truly proud of herself. "You're doing fine," she said quietly. "She looks happy." Ethan looked at her, surprised by her sincerity. "Happiness doesn't need much," he said. "Just love, patience, and maybe one decent cup of coffee." For a moment their eyes met, and both felt something neither could explain. But before anything more could be said, a tall man in a gray suit walked into the cafe. His presence turned heads instantly. He moved with the calm confidence of someone who owned more than most people could dream of. And in fact, he did. Jonathan Vale, billionaire investor, philanthropist, and Aria's rumored ex. He spotted her immediately. "Aria," he called out, smiling in that smooth, practiced way that had charmed the world. Didn't expect to see you here. The atmosphere changed. Cameras began to rise. People started whispering. Arya froze. She hated this, the attention, the shallow curiosity of strangers. Jonathan approached their table, his gaze flicking briefly toward Ethan and Ava with mild disapproval. I didn't know you were meeting anyone, he said pointedly. Ethan stayed calm, protective instinct rising in his chest. Ava, sensing the tension, leaned closer into him. Arya opened her mouth to explain, but Jonathan reached out, touching her arm possessively. Come, there's a private room upstairs. We can talk. Before she could respond, Ethan gently pulled Ava aside and stood up, his voice firm but calm. Excuse me, he said evenly, stepping between Jonathan and Arya. She's not going anywhere with you. The billionaire blinked, incredulous. I beg your pardon. Ethan met his gaze, unflinching. That's my seat. The entire café went silent. Arya stared at him, her breath caught in her throat. Jonathan's face hardened. Do you have any idea who I am? He asked coldly. Ethan didn't flinch. Doesn't matter who you are, he said. Respect does. There was something so steady, so unshakably grounded in his voice that Jonathan, for the first time, didn't have a comeback. He straightened his suit, his jaw tightening. You should learn your place, he muttered, turning sharply to leave. But as he did, Arya stood up too. He already knows his place, she said, her voice trembling with emotion. It's right where real men stand, between cruelty and kindness. And Jonathan stopped mid-step. The crowd that had gathered around began murmuring, not in mockery but admiration. Arya looked back at Ethan, her eyes glistening. Thank you, she whispered. The rest of the afternoon passed in quiet conversation. Arya asked about Ava, about their life. Ethan listened when she spoke about fame's emptiness, the pain of being surrounded by people who only loved her reflection. Slowly they found pieces of themselves in each other, both tired, both trying, both human. When they finally left the cafe, the sky had shifted to a gentle orange. Arya offered them a ride. Ethan declined at first, but Ava's excitement melted his hesitation. It's not every day a movie star drives us home, she giggled. Inside the car, laughter filled the air, soft, unforced, healing. Arya felt alive again, not as an actress or a name, but as a person. And when they reached Ethan's small apartment building, she hesitated before saying goodbye. You know, she said, I could use someone who knows about engines. My car keeps stalling. Ethan smiled knowingly. Maybe it just needs someone who cares enough to fix it. That night, Arya couldn't sleep. The memory of his steady voice, Ava's laughter, the way he looked at her not as a celebrity, but as a woman, it lingered. So, the next morning, she called him. Not for the car, but to ask if he and Ava would join her on set for a charity event she was hosting for single parents. Ethan hesitated but agreed. And when they arrived, dressed simply but proudly, the world watched something unexpected unfold. Reporters swarmed, but Arya didn't hide. She stood beside Ethan and Ava, smiling as she introduced them publicly. This man, she said to the cameras, reminded me what real strength looks like. Not the kind that makes headlines, the kind that raises a child with love even when the world turns away. The story went viral. But for once, Arya didn't care about fame. What mattered was that Ethan found work again. This time managing her film studio's maintenance department. And Ava found a friend in the actress who once seemed untouchable. Weeks later, Arya visited their small home again, carrying a simple homemade pie. As they sat together at the dinner table, Ava looked between them and smiled. Daddy, she said innocently, do you like Miss Arya? Ethan glanced at Arya, who was already blushing. I do, he said softly. She reminds me that some people don't just act kind, they are. A tear welled in Arya's eyes. For years, she'd played characters who found love after heartbreak. She never imagined she'd live it herself. Not with someone famous, but with someone real. And as the evening light spilled across the room, Ethan reached for her hand. No cameras, no headlines, no pretending. Just two broken souls finding something whole again. If this story touched your heart, if you believe love, respect, and kindness still exist in a world that often forgets them, please like, share, and subscribe to Kindness Journal. Your small action helps us keep telling stories that restore faith in humanity. Special request before you go. Drop a comment below. Would you stand up for a stranger the way Ethan did? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Because sometimes, all it takes to change a life is saying, "That's my seat."